The cup has been lifted. The Florida Panthers are the brand new Stanley Cup champions. We're going to talk all about how they got there on the latest episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And of course, breaking down this major Linus Ullmark trade.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So many different angles to be broken down on the Tuesday episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. Me, oh my, Mr. Roden. The Florida Panthers are the new Stanley Cup champions, and there are a lot of angles to cover: fantasy, statistics, history, and of course, later on in today's episode, we're breaking down this major Linus Ullmark trade. The Boston Bruins move him out. I don't know what you think about this one, Steele, but we'll talk about it. Fantasy fallout, of course. And you know I already got these odds up for next year's Stanley Cup. We're taking a look at it. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs continue to wind down, Steele, they're over, baby. But all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up customers with a boost daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You won't be betting on any more playoff, Steele, but there is a whole lot of other things going down. As I alluded to, you could already be sprinkling on some Stanley Cup futures bets. Look, the season is over, my friend. We did it. We got through the entire year. Hockey is now into its dormant summer months, but that doesn't mean you and I are stopping. We're going to have countdowns, breakdowns, sleepers, under-the-radar targets, young guns, vets, banger league beauties, you name it. Steele and I will be breaking it down all summer long. However, let's start with the obvious, Steele. Before we get to Ullmark, what's your takeaway here of this entire series? You and I were talking about Paul Maurice. Good to see him get it. Obviously, the story for McDavid and the Oilers falls short, but there are so many other good ones. Sasha Barkov, the first Finnish-born NHL captain in history. Bob gets his first one. You take it away, brother, because also I'll say this. That game, 2-1, Edmonton had their chances, but the Florida Panthers clamped it down when it mattered the most, and they are the new champs.
Yeah, and much deserved after, again, a 3-0 series lead was given up. They come back and they win this game 2-1. And I think this was the type of game that we expected all series long instead of the 8-1, 5-1, 5-3, 3-0 type of games that we saw in each aspect of both the Panthers and Oilers. I saw more of a closer game, and that's what we got finally in Game 7. Look, the Edmonton Oilers had a lot of chances to tie this one up. They had the chances. Yes. They hit post. They had empty nets where it just seemed like the puck was not going to cross the line somehow when it should have. So a lot of opportunities for the Edmonton Oilers where they couldn't capitalize. The one storyline that pops into my head, there's a lot of storylines, and we're going to be talking about this for a little bit. So the one that really jumps off the page is, well, actually, I guess there's two.
Hit me.
I got to go back to the Matthew Tkachuk trade to the Florida Panthers for Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, and a 2025 conditional first-round pick. When that trade happened, everyone was talking about how it was the worst trade in Florida Panthers history. They're trading away the core of Jonathan Huberdeau and a defenseman in Mackenzie Weegar with a first-round pick for Matthew Tkachuk and a conditional fourth-round pick in 2025. They signed him to that 8-year, $9.5 million deal. And in 2 years, he's been to the Stanley Cup finals twice, lost the finals the first time, and then wins it the second time in incredible and heart-pacing fashion like we just saw. So that's number one, is going back to that trade. But number two is also the signing of Sergei Bobrovsky at $10 million AAV. That saying that's the worst contract in the NHL. What are they doing out here using so much cap towards Sergei Bobrovsky, who's on the older side of the spectrum in the National Hockey League? And yeah, at the time, it may have looked like it was one of the worst contracts in the league because he wasn't performing at that level of what he was getting paid. But now he's a Stanley Cup champion. He also performed fantastically in last year's playoffs. He performed great up until he performed great up until games 4, 5, and 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals. So he gets that job done as well. You got to look at the way Bill Zito really structured this team over the last 3 years specifically, getting Sam Reinhart, getting Sam Bennett, Matthew Tkachuk, all of these players to fill in around Barkov, Ekblad, Montour, these type of players as well in the top six. Carter Verhaeghe, who had a big goal, and what an absolute beautiful tip to get the first one of the game in the Stanley Cup Finals Game 7. Also had the assist. So those are the storylines for me, is what Bill Zito really did in signing Sergei Bobrovsky. Obviously, the Matthew Tkachuk trade, of course, had a huge part to do with this. And look, the first time that the organization of the Florida Panthers in 30 plus years, they win their first Stanley Cup. Tremendous feat right there. They get it done against one of the better teams in the Western Conference, the Edmonton Oilers. And that's my takeaways off the jump.
So immediately, where was Leon Draisaitl for me? The Edmonton Oilers, obviously, you got the massive output of offense, and, the big guns started to fire. He was chipping in with assists. No goals in the Stanley Cup final from Leon is not going to be good enough, especially when the Florida Panthers clamp down their game. You're going to need someone other than McJesus to do it. And he just wasn't there. And is he still having an amazing postseason, all things considered? Of course. Is he still one of the best players in the world? Of course. 0 goals in the Cup final from your second biggest gun or your 1B. That's going to catch up to you. And it did in the end. Number 2, Steele. This Florida Panthers team, their stick work, they don't lose many puck battles. And that's just another extension of Paul Maurice. And what I noticed in Game 7, and I know Oilers had their chances, and it's a 1-goal game that could have gone either way. That's just something that's really impressive to me. They're a very hard team to play against. You and I throw around the term pesky a lot. We talked about the Preds coming into the season as maybe one of those teams. This Florida Panthers team embodies the definition of pesky. And let me just throw a couple of cherries on top of your point before we get to break. We'll come back around the break, talk about Linus Ullmark, but we got other Cup angles to cover. I want to ask you about Stuart Skinner's fantasy value for next season, Steele, and talk about a couple of odds that I'm already going to get to sprinkling on a couple of long shots. But here you go. Sergei Bobrovsky, 700 career regular season games before his first Cup is the most ever by a goaltender in NHL history before winning their first Stanley Cup. And how about this one to put a cherry on your Tkachuk trade chat? The Panthers led the NHL with 123 total wins since acquiring Matthew Tkachuk in the 2022-23 season. That is a staggering number right there, and I think it very nicely backs you up to what Bill Zito has done with this team. That is a scary individual, by the way, Steele. I don't know if you caught any highlights of Bill Zito over the course of this playoff.
Why does it look like his eyes are going to pop out of his head?
That is not a guy that I would want to be disappointing or letting down in any sense of the imagination. And then you sprinkle in Paul Maurice's intensity, and that Florida Panthers room is wired, just like the rest of today's episode will be, my friend. But over to you with your take there. I don't know if you got anything else to say, but at the pinnacle of all this, all of the work you and I have put in this season, fantasy seasons have been over for a while, but this is just, it's kind of like an aha moment for us as well to look back on what a special season it has been. And I know McDavid fell short, and there would have been a lot more historic storylines, comebacks, the Leafs in 42, all of that. It feels like the better team won, the more complete all-around team, at least anyway, Steele. And I'm happy for the Florida Panthers organization. I'm happy for Paul Maurice. However, I am already looking forward to next season because my brain's churning. I got odds popping. I'm looking at under-the-radar cats. I got to bounce back in a big way from last year's poor fantasy showing. So there's lots going on in this NHL, and you and I will break it all down all summer long.
All summer long, of course. We're going to continue the hot content. Again, we're going to talk about Stuart Skinner's fantasy value after the break. And then we'll obviously have to do a top 15 fantasy hockey goaltender segment because he's going to fall into the top 15. Now, before we get to break, though, I do just have to throw this out there. Maybe we touch on it after the break as well. But I think this might be it as well. Another storyline from the Stanley Cup Finals and what we saw. But this might be it for Corey Perry in the National Hockey League. 39 years old. He has now lost 4 Stanley Cup Finals in the last 5 years with 4 different teams. The Montreal Canadiens, Dallas Stars, Tampa Bay Lightning, and now the Edmonton Oilers. The Corey Perry Stanley Cup Final curse is true and real. It is in full effect right now. But for the 39-year-old forward who continues to do very impressive things on very impressive teams, just can't seem to get that second cup in his history.
Mm-hmm.
But as well, again, he's 39 years old. I'm not sure how much longer he has in the National Hockey League. We believe that Joe Pavelski, again, another 38, 39-year-old, who's been to the finals a few times, who's dominated the last couple of years with a very impressive team in the Dallas Stars. We believe it's not official, I don't think, but we believe that he's going to be retiring soon as well. So I'm not sure what's going on with Corey Perry, but I think it might be time for him to hang up the skates as well.
Big time changing of the guard in the NHL as well, Steele. These players, Perry, Pavelski, Malkin, Crosby, Ovi, these have been the faces of the entire league for 2 decades, and they're not going to be around perhaps at this time next year, a lot of those names. However, we're not going to speculate. We'll break down all the top veteran beauties that you might need on your fantasy team later on in the summer. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. We love sports, and we love them so much, we never want them to stop. And sports ain't stopping at FanDuel, where you can keep betting on them all summer long. FanDuel is hooking up customers all summer long with a boost or bonus daily. That's right, something for everyone every day all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
And thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit that subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. Make sure you also go check out Locked On Sports Day's YouTube channel. You can also find them on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. The Stanley Cup Finals, the playoffs, it's all over. The Florida Panthers are champions. We talked about the Florida Panthers a little bit, but let's talk about Stuart Skinner and his fantasy value going into next season. Flip, over to you for this as well. Where would you like to start with this player? What his fantasy value is, how he performed in the Stanley Cup Finals Game 7. Stuart Skinner, though, he did put on a very good performance from games 4 through 7. He was dominating in the postseason.
Honestly, one of the things that intrigues me the most about Stuart Skinner, because he obviously had his struggles at times during this entire playoffs. If you want to look at it as a broad piece of his work over the course of the last 2 months, there was masterpieces, and then there was times where you were really concerned. And they even had to go to Calvin Pickard, so it wasn't just us that was concerned. He was obviously not living up to what they needed him to do. He finishes the postseason with a, 901 save percentage and a 245 goals against. It's pretty mediocre. It's okay. It's average in terms of the numbers. Was he obviously sensational in elimination games and in the back half of series? Those numbers speak for themselves. They're crooked. Was he the reason they didn't win this series? I'm going to go definitely not. Could he have perhaps won it for them, though, by stealing one of those first 3 games that they just got absolutely outworked? Perhaps. But I don't think we're here to nitpick that, because let me just throw out one more stat for you. This Florida Panthers team, aside from that blip on the radar there and those couple of games where the Edmonton Oilers just blew the doors off them offensively, take this one in, Steele. Barkov, Bob, and the rest of the Florida Panthers faced 5 players in the Stanley Cup with 100-plus points this past regular season. 5 goals from those players total in 24 games. This Florida Panthers team was stingy defensively, and it didn't have anything to do with Stuart Skinner. However, next season, I'm taking a real long look at Stuart Skinner as a very good option, who, say what you will about some of those other numbers, which I think will improve after another season being battle-tested. He's going to get you some wins playing on this Edmonton Oilers team.
Yeah, he is very fantasy valuable going into next season. And there's no question about it, because he is the number 1 goaltender for the Edmonton Oilers. Again, no question about that whatsoever. You know, I know they have Calvin Pickard and Jack Campbell, but they ain't going to do nothing. Stuart Skinner has now put himself in that tier of fantasy value stardom, not like we talk about when we talk about Connor Hellebuck, UC Saros, Gorgiev, honestly, Igor Shesterkin and Sorokin. I know Sorokin had a bad season, but he still finished very high fantasy value-wise. Stuart Skinner, though, it's going to be an interesting conversation. That's why I'm very looking forward to doing a top 15 fantasy hockey goaltender list in the coming weeks after, free agency and draft and all that. And we're going to definitely have to get that done early July, but a top 15, because he's going to for sure crack the top 15 for me. He may even crack the top 10 depending on what happens. We have to take into consideration the Jacob Markstrom trade to the New Jersey Devils and we've already talked about the fantasy value there. We're about to talk about the Linus Ullmark trade to the Ottawa Senators. What does that mean for both Linus Ullmark as well as Jeremy Swayman? So it's going to be a very interesting
you mean you weren't drafting Joonas Korpisalo still? No, I'm kidding.
No,
I'm here
not
for it.
doing that.
I
ain't doing that again. So I'm looking very, very much to doing the top 15 fantasy hockey goaltenders going into next season. But before we continue this conversation, continuing on Stuart Skinner, though, look, I agree with you wholeheartedly. This Stanley Cup Finals loss is not on him. Sasha Barkov, what he's been able to do to shut down superstar players in every single round throughout the playoffs. Florida Panthers, he shut down Nikita Kucherov, Steven Stamkos, Braden Point. Then he shuts down David Pastrnak. Then he's shutting down Mika Zibanejad and Artemi Panarin. Then he's shutting down Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl for the most part, like you said. So that's number one. The Selke Trophy winner continues to dominate on both ends of the ice. But for Stuart Skinner, I don't blame this on him. Yeah, he could have stole a game maybe in the first three. I will say, however, I was not a fan of the second goal that he let in the Stanley Cup Finals. The Sam Reinhart goal easily could have been stopped.
Gotta have it.
Obviously, the patience of Sam Reinhart played a fact into that. A little hesitation on the shot, but he should have stopped that puck, in my opinion. I hate for that one to be the game-winning goal, but it's also a lot of this goes on the forward group of the Edmonton Oilers not being able to score once again in the biggest moment, biggest stages of their life.
I agree, pal. And hey, everyone and their mother spoke about Connor McDavid, and he was still creating. There was chances there. He was all over the ice. This isn't one of those, where was Connor McDavid? That's where I'm looking at Leon Draisaitl a bit more, and I guarantee you're going to hear something over the next couple of days about him being injured as well. So I'm not trying to jump all over the Edmonton Oilers because it could have gone either way. How about one more stat for you, though, Steele, before we head to Linus Ullmark, and I'm going to throw out a couple of odds here for next year's Stanley Cup. Connor McDavid is the 9th player in NHL history to win the Conn Smythe, Art Ross, Ted Lindsay, and Hart Memorial Trophy. You want to hear a couple of the other guys who have done it? Ovi, Crosby, Malkin, Lemieux, Gretzky, Lafleur, and Bobby Orr. Not too bad. And headed into next season, Steele, I am going to have my eyes even extra glued on Connor McDavid. Not because I think he's going to do something like score 300 points. We know what he can do. He's going to be sensational once again. If for some reason things don't exactly go to plan for the Edmonton Oilers off the start like it did last season, I don't know, Steele. I'm going to starting rumors here. What does this team do after the Stanley Cup Final is the main point. How do they respond next season? I don't mean changing rosters. I don't mean doing anything differently. Can they run it back? Can they be as good as they were in those 3 games? That's what I mean when I'm looking at this Oilers team, because losing in the fashion that they did, as much as the comeback was real, that's gutty. It's gut-wrenching. There's going to be some questions, to be some soul-searching to be done. However, let me just bring this up before I throw it back to you. Currently, Steele, the Florida Panthers are the Cup favorite for next year at plus 900. Then you got the Carolina Hurricanes at plus 950, along with the Colorado Avalanche and Dallas Stars. And then at plus 1,000, the Edmonton Oilers are the 5th favorite for the next year's Stanley Cup. And I want to throw out my favorite value bet looking at this board, and I think you'll appreciate it. All the way down, you got to look to the 13th favorite team in the Tampa Bay Lightning at plus 2,000 for the Stanley Cup, considering the roster that team has and the elite pieces on the blue line and up front, a healthy Sergachev and otherwise. Still, I don't hate plus 1,900. However, the odds of the Ottawa Senators have just shot up the board to plus 3,200 for obvious reasons. Why don't we talk about Linus Ullmark in a hot minute?
Yeah, we will in a hot minute. I just got to touch on that for certain before we get there. Chris Knobloch, he's going to have this team locked on, like we saw him do when he took over from Jay Woodcroft. Yeah. And we've already seen a team make it to the Stanley Cup Finals in back-to-back season now in the Florida Panthers. So there's more than enough. But obviously, there's going to be some changes going on in the Edmonton Oilers roster. But I believe they're going to be a team that's able to get back to the Stanley Cup Finals. And there was the question about, is Stuart Skinner going to be able to be that goaltender to get them there? I think the question's been answered. He is capable of doing so, even when he performs badly on a night. He can bounce back in a big way, especially games 4 through 7. So I think the Edmonton Oilers can run it back. Obviously, a few changes are going to have to be made, but that's number one. Number two, you've got the Stanley Cup odds up for next year.
Sir.
I need your help because I can't find them right now.
I got you.
I'm going with the New York Rangers again. The New York Rangers are going to be my team. Plus 1,300. There you have it for the New York Rangers.
They have the same odds as their Metro Division rival, the New Jersey Devils, at plus 1,300 as well, Steele. This board is very intriguing at this time of year, considering they just are still partying, drinking out of the cup right now, and these odds are already ready for betting. Number one, the degenerate in me absolutely loves that. But, I'm looking all the way down the board, Steele, like, do you hate the Nashville Predators at 3,100? Like, you're starting to get crazy here with value. However, the point holds true in terms of over the next couple of weeks as we head into free agency here, these odds shuffle, but also will your angles of how you're breaking down fantasy value. And in specific with Linus Ullmark, taking a look at where he's headed for an Ottawa Senators team that at times was very shaky in their own end last season, and a Boston Bruins team that kind of hangs its hat at being a very tough to play against squad. And now you got to get thrown into the Ottawa Senators mix. I don't know what you think in terms of fluctuating fantasy value, but I'm taking a close look at Linus Ullmark because still valuable, of course, still a good goaltender, most definitely. But you can't help but feel that insulation that he had in Boston is not exactly going to be the same with this Ottawa Senators club.
Well, I did just allude to what the fantasy value will mean for both Linus Ullmark as well as Jeremy Swayman because of this trade to the Ottawa Senators. Possibly both these goaltenders will be, at least one of them will be, but I believe both will be in my top 15 list once we get down to that in early July. And that's what we're going to talk about right after the break. Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators. What happened here? Did the Boston Bruins get fleeced? All of that and more right after the break. Once again, thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Continue to hit the subscribe button, the follow button, leave a 5-star review. We appreciate all that love and support you show us. Monday through Friday, 7 o'clock in the morning is when you can find our episodes. Thank you so much again. And thank you to the Ottawa Senators and Boston Bruins for throwing us a little treat before puck drop of Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Yeah. What a way to break it. You called me in the car as I was heading to a buddy's house to watch this game. I believe you were in the car as well at the time, breaking some great news. By the way, congratulations again on the new jobs you got.
Appreciate that, brother. Thank you very much.
For you. But you broke this to me as I was in the car on my way to a buddy's house. Linus Ullmark to the Ottawa Senators. At the time, we didn't know what the full deal was, but now we do. Yes. Now we do know what the full deal is between the Ottawa Senators and Boston Bruins. First of all, like you said, strange that's a in-division trade for the Boston Bruins like this. Yeah. But the Ottawa Senators receive Linus Ullmark. In return, they receive a 2024 first-round pick, the 25th overall pick. Joonas Korpisalo, which 25% was being retained by the Ottawa Senators, and forward Mark Kastelic. A fourth-line centerman who played, let me just pull this up real quick.
63 games last year.
144 games through 3 seasons with the Ottawa Senators and has 25 points. So I'm going to throw it straight over to you, my friend. Sure. What were your first thoughts when you saw the entirety of this trade?
Well, when I factor in the point that you already brought up about an interdivision trade for a goaltender that you're going to have to face now at least a handful of times, I scratch my head a little bit. However, look, we kind of saw this coming after how good Jeremy Swayman was, not only in the postseason, but last year as well. Jeremy Swayman went 25-10-8 with a .916 save percentage and 3 shutouts over 44 regular season games, and was obviously sensational, .933 save percentage and 12 starts in the postseason. we knew something kind of had to give here. We don't know what it's like in that dressing room, or maybe something was said to Ullmark. I don't know those angles. However, Steele, to answer your question, I can't help but feel that the Ottawa Senators made out like absolute bandits here. And I know they have to retain 25% of Korpisalo's salary. That ain't nothing. However, what I do look at it as, Jeremy Swayman is about to have a serious uptick in value in terms of at least playing more games, because no disrespect to Korpisalo, but if Swayman was playing 44 regular season games last year, I see 54 or a couple of more, in my opinion, because he is not Linus Ullmark in terms of a secondary option. So, in my opinion, Steele, the Sens made out like bandits here. However, I'm a little bit curious about what it means for Linus Ullmark's numbers, who have been very good over the last couple of seasons.
Look, I agree wholeheartedly again with what you're saying of the Ottawa Senators making out like bandits. I think the Boston Bruins, when all things are said and done, this is a win for the Ottawa Senators. And I understand, look, they still get a first-round pick in this year's draft, the 25th overall pick, and that could be very helpful for them. They get 25% off of Joonas Korpisalo. I think that's, very interesting in itself. So instead of $4 million, they're paying him $3 million. The Mark Kastelic is just like a little throw-in, honestly. Like he's not going to bring much, and this doesn't help them.
They need center help even in the bottom.
Yeah,
six, this is going to fill a hole.
It doesn't help them down in the depth of the center position either. Like it's just again, you're throwing him in the fourth line pretty much. Yeah. So there's that. So I really look at this as, to me, what the deal is for Jeremy Swayman's going to be, because Linus Ullmark was making $5 million. You're trading a 30-year-old goalie for a 30-year-old goalie. So you're trading Linus Ullmark, who's making $5 million, for Joonas Korpisalo, who's making, for now, what you're paying him, $3 million. That's a $2 million difference. That speaks volumes to what it seems like Jeremy Swayman is going to get paid on this contract. He is an RFA. He is going to be signed this offseason. And that speaks to me that his fantasy value, along with what he's going to make this next season, is going to be upwards of $8 million. And I think he truly deserves that at this point in his career. Jeremy Swayman, 25 years old, they're going to lock him up for long term. I think we could potentially see something of what Connor Hellebuyck is making right now. I don't know exactly what Connor Hellebuyck. I believe he was making just over $8 million or close to $8 million.
It's very team friendly, the Hellebuyck deal. It might
very team. Yeah, might be 7.9 or 8. If you're able to bring that up right now.
I'm pulling it up right now because I think you're right, Steele. And when it comes down to contracts, because the cap going up, it's going to fluctuate somewhat. But I'm here for this situation because, look, when goalies get traded, number one goaltenders, former Vezina winners from only a couple of years ago, we got to talk about it. $8.5 million per year for Hellebuyck into 2031.
So exactly. So 8.5 for Connor Hellebuyck. I think Jeremy Swayman's looking at least $8 million. I think he lands anywhere from $7 to $8 million. And if you keep Linus Ullmark, you're not going to want to have, let me do the math real quick. You're not going to want to have $13 million. You're not going to want to have $13 million in cap space on two net minors right there. Even though they're both stellar goaltenders.
No, for sure.
You're not going to want to tie up that much money in two goaltenders. That's why you trade Linus Ullmark. So I believe Jeremy Swayman's going to be getting close to $8 million, if not $8 million on this next contract. He's going to be signed up long term. We know how the Boston Bruins are with their contracts. They usually, for the most part, actually all the time, it seems like they have really good deals and really good negotiations with their players. What we see with, besides this David Pastrnak coming up, even that's still a good deal. Brad Marchand under $7 million still. So there's a lot of great contracts in the Boston Bruins roster. But for Jeremy Swayman, they're going to lock him up. They're going to pay him. And fantasy value-wise, I agree with you. He's going to be getting all the starts, most of the starts now. The fantasy value is going to continue to go up because they're still a strong defensive team. I also think Linus Ullmark fantasy value is going to go up as well. I think this is going to be a very dangerous Ottawa Senators team. And I know we said that last year when they acquired and signed Joonas Korpisalo. But in my opinion, Linus Ullmark is strides above Joonas Korpisalo in fantasy value and what he brings on an NHL level.
1 year removed from leading the league in 40 wins, a .938 save percentage, and 1.89 goals against. Led the league in all three. Takes home the Vezina Before then, though, Steele, he was also put, 3 straight years of a 915 plus save percentage. I know in Buffalo, he was only getting like 30 or 20 or 30 starts there for a couple of seasons, but the numbers are there, and the point holds true. The Edmonton Oilers, man, we've been talking about those two teams too much. The Ottawa Senators have been in on every single goaltender that with a pulse for 6 months now, looking for an answer in the cage. New coaching, new front office situation, new ownership. Maybe this means a new environment as well, Steele. All of those things play into the product on the ice, obviously. And hey, they got themselves a goalie. This Atlantic Division, Steele, is about to get spicy headed into July 1. But you and I will break it all down. News, top 10s, you name it, we got it for you.
We got it indeed. Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Once again, make sure you hit the subscribe button, the subscribe button, the follow button, and
all the buttons.
All the buttons that you can see. Hit the buttons. Make sure you go check out Locked On Sports Today as well, the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. You can also find it on the free Amazon Fire TV channel app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every single day. Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to our team right here on the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, watching today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.